Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Wednesday, November 8th, 2023. Our good friend Phil Giraldi joins the show. Phil, always a pleasure. Thank you for coming back. We have two topics I want to discuss with you. You have published extensively on both of those topics in the past 5 days, the Russia-Ukraine war and the war in Gaza. We'll start with Ukraine. Why is it, after the American government spent $113 billion, it seems to have lost interest in Ukraine?
Well, that's there might be a simple answer to that. I would suggest that somehow they something has gotten through their thick skulls, and they have figured out that there is no winning this war in any way that would be politically attractive to the regime in Washington, or that would actually work. So they've come around to, I think, a nudge and a push in terms of encouraging Ukraine to be looking at other alternatives instead of continuing the war as is through the winter. That's just a suspicion on my part, and but there seems to be a bit of evidence in terms of the recent visit by Mr. Zelenskyy to the United States, where he was kind of, in reality, snubbed by almost everyone.
Whereas his visit a year ago, he was treated like a conquering hero, and he went home with a ton of cash, not literally in his pockets, but promised to him. Does the American government look upon him as someone who's not worthy of belief, someone who's in it for himself, someone who's the head of a corrupt gang? Or do they look upon him as some sort of a freedom fighter, which is what they claimed a year and a half ago?
Well, I think that the freedom fighter thing was kind of a done up job to support the policy, and the policy was to confront Russia, and so he was turned into a figure that he really wasn't. After all, he was a comedian, an actor, before he was elevated by one of his billionaire friends into a position where he was made promises about mending fences with the Russians, and managed to get elected, and then managed to turn on the policies. So he's not exactly a heavyweight here. And I think that's becoming quite clear, even to people in Congress who tend to be a little bit dense about these issues. So we shall see where it's going. But I think we're going to see some shifts in the next couple of months. We'll probably see less fighting. In one of the articles I wrote, one of the senior generals in Ukraine said something to the effect of, "I don't care how many more weapons they ship in here. We don't even have the men to pick them up and use them." So this is an indictment coming from straight inside the system, that if the war is not lost, at least it's not winnable.
Is the government still corrupt? I mean, you quote some people as saying they are stealing money as if there's no tomorrow, because I guess they know the gravy train is going to end soon.
Yeah, in fact, one of the very senior officials that was cited in one of my articles said something to the effect of, "They're stealing everything." So it's and bear in mind that when Zelenskyy was in Washington, the issue of corruption was raised a number of times. So there is maybe a certain sensitivity in Washington developing that this largesse that we're heaping on them, money, weapons, this is all kind of going in different directions. There were claims that Hamas had some weapons, small arms, obviously, that had serial numbers that indicated that they were had been given to the Ukrainians.
Meaning American weapons given to the Ukrainians and probably sold
Hmm.
to Hamas.
That's right, precisely. Yeah.
Does that, with all your years in the CIA, does that surprise you?
No, not at all. I think there's a whole history of dissident groups, armed groups that the United States government and other governments have been supporting clandestinely through the years since the Second World War, where these weapons have a tendency to, shall we say, dissipate and get sold to the highest bidder. I find it fascinating. I'd love to know the conduit whereby American weapons or British weapons up in Ukraine managed to wind up in Gaza, as Gaza is enclosed by walls and barriers and all kinds of things on every side. It would be very interesting to see how these guys selling the weapons outsmarted the system.
So the fighters in Gaza have American AR-15s, and the Israeli Defense Forces shooting at them have American AR-15s because America loves war and can't control what happens to the equipment it authorizes to be sold to foreign groups. Mm-hmm. What is your view on this interview that General Zelenskyy, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian military, gave to The Economist magazine, in which he said, and nobody disputes that he said this, that we're at a stalemate? Mm-hmm. And then the next day, President Zelenskyy's civilian team denounced him and said, don't believe him, it's not true. And then 2 days later, his chief of staff was blown apart as he opened up what he thought was a birthday present for himself in the presence of his 13-year-old son. What do you make of that?
Well, the present turned out to be 4 hand grenades,
right?
Which is kind of interesting. In my article about what's going on in Ukraine, I cited a number of individuals that basically were saying the same thing. They're saying the impediment on getting out of this stalemate or turning this stalemate into something other than a shooting war that continues to consume the young men and women of Ukraine is Zelenskyy, who wants to, for his own reasons, it seems, keep the fighting going through the winter, and with this delusion that somehow victory is around the corner. Nobody else believes that. But why does Zelenskyy believe it? I don't know. That's not clear. And Zelenskyy, of course, is a central point for corruption in the country. He has, Scott Ritter wrote an article recently where he identified 7 different major estate-style properties that Zelenskyy owns in Israel, in Switzerland, in France, and in Italy, and Miami, I believe. I think I've got that right.
Right.
But, this is pervasive, and the guy obviously has his own agendas.
Tell me about the CIA. Would they not know of all of this? Would they not know of the corruption? Who's bribing whom? Who's paying who? Where Zelenskyy is getting cash from? Would they not report that to their superiors? Wouldn't Joe Biden, or who knows what he knows, Tony Blinken, somebody be informed that, hey, the last $1 billion you sent over there, 100 million of it was distributed in cash? Would the CIA know things like that?
Yeah, they would, and it's usually in a foreign environment where there is a lot of corruption, that it's something that CIA and military intelligence would be focusing on to a large extent, because this does 2 things. It basically tells you how effective what you're doing is, and secondly, it also gives you a handle on these senior government officials in case you should want to turn them. If they're that corrupt, you could expose the corruption and say, look, we don't want this information to go anywhere else. The quid pro quo on this is that every time you have a senior cabinet level staff meeting, you come back and tell us what happened.
Is the CIA corrupt?
Well, there are different forms of corruption. I would say that the CIA has been corrupted by the political process in the United States, which has made the process of people climbing up the ladder and becoming senior officials in the agency very highly politicized. and it means that the politicians and the president want to hear certain things from the agency. So the agency very often will oblige them, which I think is a very bad thing.
I think Chris is aware of your dog. All right. Okay. You're a camera hog. You're a camera hog. There you go. Just like somebody else in this house. The murder of General Zelensky's chief of staff can't be taken lightly. Is this something Moscow would have done? The Ukraine intelligence services would have done? The Ukraine military would have done? Why kill this guy?
Well, I cannot see where Moscow would gain anything by killing him. It's not like whether he's there or not there will make the war go any differently. So I would have to think this was a personal vendetta. And again, I think you have to suggest that the finger would be pointing at Zelenskyy, obviously, who has recently had severe disagreements with the general and his aide. And maybe this was his way of sending a message. And there's certainly many people that would have been loyal enough to Zelenskyy to cooperate in doing an assassination like this. It's it's outrageous, but this is what happens.
One more area to discuss about Ukraine, and then we'll segue over to Israel and Hamas. Where are Victoria Nuland and Lindsey Graham and the neocon cheerleaders for war? We haven't heard a peep out of them since President Zelensky's unhappy trip to Washington, which is now a couple of weeks ago. Well, we've heard from them on Israel. We haven't heard a peep out of them on Ukraine.
Yeah, this is interesting. It rather suggests to me that there are signals coming from the White House and from whatever people like Lindsey Graham and Victoria Nuland trust, telling them that the policy is shifting. And these people have self-interest too. And I would rather suggest that they are seeing the tide turning, and they are taking a different course. It's interesting, for example, this whole business of the House of Representatives vote on the funding of Israel versus the funding of Ukraine. That's a pretty significant shift on the part of the Republican Party, and that could be another sign that things are changing.
Does the Netanyahu government instruct the IDF to shoot and kill their own soldiers when they think those soldiers have been or are in danger of being captured?
Well, it has been confirmed that there is a directive. It's called the Hannibal Directive in Israel for the armed forces, and this directive basically says that to have members of the IDF taken prisoner or hostage by a hostile force, it is far better if the surviving soldiers have the capability to kill them. This is preferable than to have them become hostages with all the complications of the hostage taking and making deals and that sort of thing that result from that. It has been verified that this is a policy. Whether this policy applied on October 7th is debatable, but just today the Haaretz newspaper has been publishing the names of the people, the Israelis who were killed on October 7th, and they've come up with something like more than half of the identifiable victims were soldiers. So these might have been soldiers that were in the bases that were overrun by Hamas and taken prisoner, and then when the Israeli forces came back on the scene. A shootout began, and lots of Israelis got killed in the crossfire. And the crossfire was in two directions. So
I mean,
this is an interesting hypothesis that's been raised. Yeah.
well, our friend and colleague Larry Johnson reports that on October 8th, the Israeli IDF murdered Israeli civilians who had been or were about to be captured by Hamas.
Yeah, that's another aspect of the story.
Is there any other government or military that does this that you're aware of?
I have never heard of anything like this. This would have produced a mutiny in the United States Army back when I served in it during Vietnam. And it would be, I think, produce a mutiny in virtually any military organization that I've ever heard of. This is quite bizarre.
Are there members of the Netanyahu cabinet, whether it's his major governing body or the so-called war cabinet, that have called for the annihilation of the Palestinian people?
Oh yeah, it's not uncommon. Ben Gvir would be one. Smotrich would be another. There have been through the years a number of senior politicians from the conservative side, the Likud side of the Israeli government, that have called for either killing the Palestinians off or at a minimum forcing them to leave. So this has been kind of something talked about for a long time now, and there's certainly people that are dedicated to doing just that right now. The conversations in Israel are certainly veering in that direction. Do we clear out the Gaza Strip completely, push them into Egypt, push them into the Mediterranean, or just kill them all? It's and of course this is supported by a number of U.S. politicians that, like Lindsey Graham. I mean, this is pathetic what's going on. It's just awful.
How dangerous would it be for the Israeli government to occupy and to govern, to control Gaza? I'm not talking about prison guards at the border. I'm talking about running the government and being in the streets. How dangerous is that?
Well, it depends on exactly what they have in mind. Obviously, Netanyahu has this in mind. He's talking about governing it or controlling it after whatever is going on now is concluded. And that would certainly require military presence in Gaza. It would require governors of some type or level, probably military governors. But you'd still have a substantial hostile population. I just find it a stupid prospect. Now, some of the issues that are being raised of why Israel would want to take control of Gaza are interesting. There is talk about the gas reserves that are offshore that would be worth billions and billions and billions of dollars. And there's even talk of cutting a canal that would go around from where the Suez Canal is, cut over from Gaza straight to the Red Sea. And this would be a commercial canal that, again, somebody is thinking of the money that would be made from doing this. So this has been raised in the last couple of days, and it's quite interesting.
We're going to play two tapes for you. One is ABC News asking Prime Minister Netanyahu who should govern Gaza, and the other is Secretary of State Blinken saying who cannot cover Gaza. So SOT 4, and then immediately thereafter, Chris, SOT 7.
President Biden has said that it would be a mistake for Israel to occupy Gaza. Who should govern Gaza when this is over?
I think Israel will, for an indefinite period, will have the overall security responsibility, because we've seen what happens when we don't have it.
Gaza cannot continue to be run by Hamas. That simply invites a repetition of October 7th, and Gaza uses a place from which to launch terrorist attacks. It's also clear that Israel cannot occupy Gaza. Now, the reality is that there may be a need for some transition period at the end of the.
So these guys did not get their signal straight. What does Joe Biden want? I guess he can't control Netanyahu. The United States government is not going to put strings on the billions it gives to Israel. What's the reality here of occupying Gaza, contrary to what the U.S. government wants?
Well, I think the reality is, as you just suggested, that Netanyahu is not going to listen to Biden. The U.S. has considerable leverage over Israel, given the billions and billions and billions of dollars, hundreds of billions over the course of the history of the state, more than we've given to any country ever, and it continues. 14.5 billion on the table right now to pay for the current war, and yet Biden will not bite the bullet on cutting the aid. That's essentially what it comes down to. And in addition, the other club the United States has is to stop providing political cover for whatever Israel does. And the United States could go to the United Nations tomorrow and support a bill saying that there should be a ceasefire immediately, but it won't do that.
No. If the United States did that, it would cause a revolution in American domestic politics, would it not?
Yeah, exactly. Because the propaganda has been so heavy in terms of making the case that Israel is the perpetual victim, that to try to change course right now would be a little bit tricky. And Biden has put so much of his personal equity and his personal future into the relationship with Israel, and to a lesser extent Ukraine, and that's the direction he's got to go in, or got to continue to go in.
How clear is it to you that Israel is engaged in war crimes as it slaughters civilians in Gaza?
Well, I think it's quite clear. I think the virtually every international organization that is concerned with human rights has denounced the punishment of the entire civilian population of Gaza using heavy artillery and bombs is a war crime. It's indisputably a war crime. And the United States, by virtue of the fact that it is funding this exercise, is complicit in it. And this is a tragedy for our times. It's a tragedy for our country.
Will anybody ever be prosecuted for these war crimes in Israel or the United States? Excuse me, from Israel. The prosecution wouldn't take place there. From Israel or from the United States?
No, I'm absolutely convinced that it would be too complicated to try to unravel this. And the best that the international community can hope for is that somehow this all ends up getting negotiated somehow, and it just goes away. But the 4,000 and counting dead Palestinian children are not going to go away. This is, again, an unfortunate aspect of U.S. foreign policy as it has evolved.
Has anything come, either internationally or in the intelligence community, of the, I don't know if it was intentional or inadvertent acknowledgement by a member of the Israeli cabinet, something that we all know, but the Israeli government never says it officially, that the Israelis have hundreds of nuclear weapons? Does anything come of that?
Well, I mean, the U.S. government officials are not allowed to even say that. But yeah, it's the Israelis themselves have slipped a couple of times. And again, this is the other hidden narrative, the Samson option, whereby Israel would use its nuclear weapons and use its nuclear weapons in a promiscuous fashion if it felt it was not being supported by the U.S. and the European allies. So this is a real danger. There's a book about it written by Seymour Hersh, The Samson Option, and people who are interested in it should read it.
Well, Phil Giraldi, always a pleasure, my dear friend, no matter what we're talking about. Thank you for your clarity and your courage.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll see you again next week. Oh, coming up tomorrow, three more of our superstars: Alistair Crook, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Professor John Mearsheimer, and of course, on Friday, the roundtable with Larry Johnson and Ray McGovern. Judge Napolitan. Oh, and our subscriptions are up to 231,000. We will hit that 250,000 by Christmas time. Thanks to all of you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart and from my team. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.